Hello, my name is Jay Walter, and this is Rebuilding. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions." So let's stretch our minds, find answers to problems, overcome fears, and rebuild our first kingdom. Welcome to another episode of Rebuilding with Jay Walter. I've got a very special guest with me today, Dr. Benjamin Hardiy. Dr. Benjamin Hardiy is an organizational psychologist and best-selling author of Willpower Doesn't Work. From 2015 to 2018, he was the #1 writer in the world on Medium.com. During that time, he grew his email list from 0 to 400,000 without paid advertising. Ben and his wife Lauren adopted 3 children from the foster system in February 2018, and 1 month later, Lauren got pregnant with twins who were born in December of 2018. They live in Orlando, and Ben's blogs are read by millions monthly. And today we want to talk about his new book, Personality Isn't Permanent. Personality Isn't Permanent debunks the pervasive myths of personality that have captured pop culture. For example, personality tests like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram are not only psychologically destructive, but are no more scientific than horoscopes. Personality Isn't Permanent provides science-based strategies for reframing past memories, becoming the scribe of your identity narrative, upgrading your subconscious, and redesigning your environment. Science proves you are going to change throughout your life. You might as well be intentional about that change. So thanks, Ben, for being on my show today. One thing, a personal thanks, is this podcast probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. So I really appreciate you being on today.
Tell me about that really quick. I'd be interested in hearing the story.
A year ago, October, I started in your AMP program.
Oh, nice.
And so got in with all of your teachings on how to change my life and to grow my life. I was getting prepared. I'm turning 60 this year, so I'm getting ready, in a few years to retire. And I bought the recliner and I bought the big TV, and I was going to retire to my recliner and kind of fade away like my dad did. And started with the Tribe of Kings and then with your program, and decided that really wasn't the life I wanted to lead. And so going through the AMP and getting with my accountability partners and just kind of build up my confidence, and here we go.
That's amazing. I'm really that makes me so happy to hear about your success with AMP, and also just hearing about you taking your future a different direction than the couch. That's really exciting.
Yeah. So yeah, this book kind of resonated with me as well as I the other thing, and then the question I was going to ask you is all my growing up life, I've kind of been a wallflower, kind of in the background, a little nervous about meeting people. And then I started reading the things in this book. Tell me how you think this book would affect someone who used to be like I was, and being that wallflower. How did they change their personality from what you've written?
I don't know, because I'm not sure what direction you decided your future wanted you to go. But I think what is possible through the reading of this book is understanding that whether you were a wallflower for 50 or 60 years doesn't mean you have to be anymore, and that it was a habit and a pattern,
Right.
and that you can change the habit and the pattern if you start becoming intentional to a future self that's different. And if you start being, clarifying who you want to be and then moving your life in that direction, then you're going to be consistent with your future, not your past. And so you're going to stop being that wallflower. So I'm not exactly sure who you became. I'd be very interested in you letting me know a little bit about some of the changes that you've made. But as far as the specific direction of those change, I think that has to do with more of your goals.
Yeah. Well, that's the big thing. My goals radically changed over the last 2 or 3 years. One, this studio I'm sitting in is the beginning of a voiceover business and a podcasting business, and trying to get that to where when I decide to stop being an engineer, I have some thing to do, some goal, some purpose that I can fulfill. So I'm not just wanting to sit and read the paper or watch TV or anything. I want to make an effect that changes in the world. So
It's amazing.
yeah, it really has been an amazing journey. So
So
um,
what have the people around you thought about some of these shifts?
well, my accountability partners just tell me all the time. I don't know if you remember Tamara Anderson.
Great
Um,
person.
yeah,
Love her.
she's my accountability partner right now, and we're talking all the time. And she says there's been a massive change in the way I interact with people. I still am overcoming that. How do I get out in new situations and meet people? That's still a little difficult for me, but I'm learning. Um, but yeah, it's like I say, this podcast really is a stretch for me. It's been a big stretch for me to try and get meet new people and interview people and build that skill of how to ask the right question at the right time. Um,
But you're here right now doing it. So the fact
exactly.
that you're doing it's proving to yourself and to me and to everyone else that you are doing it and that you're being stretched right now and you're being changed
Yeah. Yeah.
right in real time, right in front of us.
Right in front of us. So, um, one of the other this you talk about massively transformative purpose. Describe to me what you mean by that.
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about how the general view of personality is that it's your innate self, it's just who you are, and it's something you must discover, which is why people really subscribe to personality tests because it can be a discovery tool.
Hmm.
And that view of personality then leads people to a very dogmatic and narrow view of themselves and what they can do. So that view of personality, like once you've discovered yourself, then what your job is to build your life around that narrow view of yourself, that narrow slit, personality. So your personality becomes the basis of your goals, which you may or may not have wanted. And anything and everything you do is to avoid pain and to pursue pleasure. You do what's comfortable to you. You do what you feel like is intuitive and natural
Right.
rather than pursuing potentially something that's transformative. And so, a much higher level thinking perspective and a more intentional approach to personality is deciding what you believe in, what and then ultimately coming to some sense of purpose in your life. Defining a purpose, and that purpose can be flexible; it can adjust over time. But having a sense of purpose then leads you to doing things that you otherwise wouldn't have leads to doing things that are uncomfortable, leads you to stretching yourself. And so purpose can and should trump personality. Your
Mm.
purpose, rather than having your goals come from your personality, you could actually have your personality be the byproduct or come from your goals or your purpose.
Oh,
Because
okay.
all you have to do is just decide for yourself what is valuable or what would be worthwhile or what would be important. For you, it could be in the form of a podcast and impacting people's lives. That's a very powerful purpose, and then that purpose could lead you to doing things that are above and beyond your current identity, your current situation, your current mindset, and those things could then stretch you, and you'd have experiences that would then alter and change your confidence in your personality. So
Right.
that's kind of what I'm talking about here.
Okay. So my my next thought was I always hear the statement that life is not about finding yourself, but at finding all the things that you're not and removing them. Is that kind of what that transformative purpose is pushing you towards?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I think that you know I'm not so sure what I think or how I feel about that statement since it's the first time I've ever actually heard it,
Okay.
and so I'm not gonna say I have like the world's strongest opinion of it right now, but it seems like that's of a discover yourself mentality.
Okay.
Whereas I think George Bernard Shaw and others have said something more along the lines of rather than trying to find yourself, life is about creating yourself, which is more of a perspective of choice.
Right.
focusing on the choices you could make rather than overly focusing on what you think your innate abilities are.
Ah,
I think it's a lot more powerful to make choices and make decisions. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, said that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose your own way.
yeah, yeah.
And so you have to decide what you focus on. If you focus on what you don't believe, what you believe can't change, then you're going to find all the ways in which you're limited. Whereas if you focus on what you can choose and what's possible, then what you focus on expands. And so I'm far more of a believer in making choices and decisions, and through those decisions, expanding my abilities and expanding and changing my potential rather than overly focusing on what I think my non-elastic, overly dogmatic, overly stuck potential is. I'd rather focus on choice.
Okay. So yeah, where that's saying that there's one set way you can be, you're saying your choices can change who
Lead you
you
to who
are,
you are.
lead you to
Yes.
who you are,
And
and
there's a
lead you
million
who you
different
want to
versions of who
be.
you could be.
Yeah.
there's Yeah.
Yeah, so you really choose who you want to be, and you make the choices, make the goals, make the
Yeah.
opportunities to be who you want
I
to
mean,
be.
obviously, you're born with attributes, characteristics, a context, a situation. But, as you grow up, as you become more mature, as you build confidence, as you start to make your own decisions in life, then, you're responsible. Like there's a quote from, I didn't quote this in the book because it's not really fully relevant, but there's a quote from Bill Gates that he says, "If you're born poor, that's not your fault, but if you die poor, that is your fault." Like I'm not. This isn't really about money, but it's kind of the same idea that whoever you're born as and the situation you're in isn't really your fault, but who you die as is your fault because at some point or another you actively chose to stay a certain way or to become a certain person.
Right.
So the sooner you can wake up to the reality that you're making choices right now, and those choices are shaping your identity, shaping your personality, and as soon as you take that ownership and that responsibility of who you are, then you can start to actually have a lot more choice and say in how you show up, how you see the world, what your identity is, how you relate with people. You know, I mean, think about it. Can you change the way you dress? Yes, you can
Absolutely.
change the way you dress. You could go from slob to looking good. Can you change how you do your hair and how you groom yourself? You can change those things, but those are aspects of people's personality. As weird as it sounds, you can change your favorite color. Like you can convince yourself that you like a different color. And so, um, most people just think of their current identity as who they are, and they don't actually think about why it was that way. And so, um, yeah, it's a lot more flexible than that if you let it be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've talked about on my show before, um, as I was growing up, I wanted to be in television or radio, be a producer or be a personality on the radio, voice talent, and was talking to my dad about it, and he says, "No, no, no, there's no money in that. You don't want to do that. You'll never be able to support yourself." And so that kind of set that in my
That was what I
mind.
would call a trauma.
Yeah. Yeah,
That was an experience that literally reshaped your identity and reshaped your goals.
exactly.
It
And
limited your imagination.
it did, and I tried, taking some classes and that didn't work out, and so it really did shape my whole future as to becoming the path I took was totally different now. But after 50 years, here I am sitting in front of a microphone interviewing people on the new internet radio kind of thing. So,
Sounds
um,
like you went back to a childhood dream and you finally started to live it out.
yeah, exactly. And my outlook on life feels like it has changed back into the person that I wanted to be. And so, um,
It's beautiful.
it really is. Um, so how, as people want to change their personality, how do you systematically design this change, the desire to become who you want to be?
Yes, there's a lot to this.
Okay.
Let me first start by saying that change does happen, and a quick evidence of that is just asking yourself who you were 10 years ago.
Mm.
Who were you 10 years ago? What were your goals? What was your situation? What were your relationships like? What were your habits like? Maybe if you haven't done much learning, growth, and development, then you might be more similar to yourself 10 years ago than you need to be. But chances are, if you really think about it, you've probably changed a lot in the last 10 years, or
Yeah.
you can at least see some changes. And so the next question then becomes, well, who are you going to be in 10 years from now? How much do you think is possible that you can change? And so this comes from research from Dr. Daniel Gilbert from Harvard. He's a Harvard psychologist, brilliant guy. But
Mm.
one of the things that he finds in asking these two questions is that people, even if they've noticed a lot of change in themselves, they still downplay the potential change in the future. And the reason for that is two statements that Dr. Gilbert says. He says, first off, that human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. So basically what people think is that they think we're finished. Like, we think that who I am right now is who I'm going to be.
Okay.
And so we downplay the idea that we're going to change much in the future because we think we're the current evolved version of ourselves. So we downplay that we're going to change much. The second aspect is that it's a lot easier to remember our past than it is to imagine our future.
Yeah.
And Dr. Gilbert says it's not that we can't imagine or predict our future; it's that we don't. People don't spend a lot of time predicting the future, or imagining what would be considered to be a future self. And so I think when it comes to systematically shaping and identifying and becoming who you want to be, the first step would be imagining your future self, imagining who you want to be and defining that. Who do you want to be? Like, you have to answer that question in order to actually become someone in a specific direction. If you can't answer the question, who do I want to be? Then how can you actually move yourself in a specific direction as far as who you become?
Really.
And so the more definitive you get about who you want to be, and the more characteristic and shaping who is this person? What are their attributes? What is their situation? What do they like? What do they care about? How are they different than you currently? What the research shows is that your current self and your future self should be distinguished. They should be viewed as two different people.
Hmm.
Who you are right now is not who you're going to be in the future. And so you should view them as a different person. They're not you. They see the world differently. They're in a new situation. They've got different goals. Hopefully they see the world much better than you do right now because they've gone through some great learning experiences. Maybe they've had some hard failures. Maybe they've had some wake-up calls. So your future self is going to be totally different than you. And so first things first is just defining who they are and thinking about what would they want. And then you start to, once you've mapped that out, then you can kind of have a baseline for how you would start to define your own self. Rather than using personality tests as an example to shape your identity, you could use your future self as the means by which you shape your identity. One thing that's very important when it comes to imagination, because what we're talking about right now is imagination, imagining your future self. What research shows is that trauma really limits your imaginative potential. So there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, probably the definitive text right now on trauma. But what Bessel van der Kolk, the author, has found in his research on PTSD is that people with extreme trauma and PTSD have very limited imagination. What trauma does is it leads you to very rigid thinking, very rigid. You're very rigid in how you think about things and how you feel about things. You become quite dogmatic in your views, quite black and white. And so you're not mentally or emotionally flexible. And mental and emotional flexibility are what are required for imagination and seeing things differently. If you're not mentally and psychologically flexible, essentially, then you're going to think that who you are is who you are. You're going to overly defend and define yourself a certain way versus thinking you could and become someone different. So you're not going to do much imagining. You're not going to do much altering of your perspectives. And psychological flexibility and confidence are very similar concepts. So as you become more confident, you become more flexible. You begin to see things differently, new possibilities. And so you're going to need to revisit probably some of the former experiences that have shaped your current worldview of yourself, shaped your current perspectives. We've all gone through hard experiences. We've all gone through traumas. You just described one.
Right.
You just described an experience. And so even just thinking about that specific experience, your father creating that comment to you and about how that shaped your narrative, shaped your perspective, shaped your goals, shaped your trajectory. We would revisit that. I don't know if your father's still alive.
He's not.
Okay. So in going back to that memory and thinking about how it impacted you, how would you say you define that experience now?
Um, it definitely changed the way I thought about what work was. Work was specifically to make money. It wasn't to enjoy necessarily. It wasn't to grow. It was just about providing for your family. You're supposed to bring home a paycheck. You're supposed to, you know, provide those things, and so that became the focus of what I was going to do for the rest of my life is just be that breadwinner. That's
And you in that experience impacted you,
yeah,
how you view
yeah,
money, right? And
yeah.
shaped how you viewed work. And so you really bought into that experience. And at what point did you begin to question that experience or question the idea that came from that experience?
Um, it's probably been in the last 5 or 6 years is all,
So
so
when you first had that experience, what was your perspective? That I'm basically that you were learning something very important and true and that you needed to follow it.
yeah, yeah.
And so now what's your view of that experience?
Um, it was his view on how, life was supposed to be. He was depression era kid, and so that was his life view that you had to do things a specific way. You work in a company for 40 years, you get the gold watch, and you retire. And my life really turned out quite significantly different. By the time I was 30, I'd worked in 6 or 7 different companies, and that's how I got raises, was moving to the person who would pay me more. And so that was how I significantly improved my income, but it was still focused on the job rather than really where I wanted to be. So it still was kinda hiding there in the background, I think, keeping
So have
me hemmed
yeah,
in.
so when you're thinking about your dad, just as an example, and what we're doing right now is we're looking at this experience and we're providing different perspectives on this experience and we're also providing different context.
Mhm.
You now know to some degree why your father gave you the advice he did,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You didn't know that when he first gave you the advice,
right,
right? You didn't know where that advice was coming from. You just took it as ironclad truth
right.
rather than as a single perspective,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I
You now
didn't
view that experience from a different perspective. One thing I would challenge you to do is have empathy towards your father and even empathy towards your former self. Like you were doing the best you could with the information you got, right?
exactly, yeah. Yeah, I
So it's not like you need to be angry at your former self or angry at your father. There's nothing that's going to come out of that, right?
no,
You do get to choose how you view that experience, though, how you frame it, how you perceive it, and what you take from it then. So what we're doing now is we're taking the past and we're using it as information. We're
right,
using the past as knowledge and information like you would be with a book. You can take books and you can get information from them and you can use that information to make different or better decisions. And so that's what you can do with memories. And that's what you can do with the past is rather than the past dictating your choice, you can past as information.
right.
Uh, and I think that that's when you can start reframing your former experiences so that they're no longer dictating what you do. So trauma often dictates what you do,
Right.
and you avoid. Yeah, it limits your goals or it limits your potential, but it also leads you to avoiding hard negative experiences. And
Yeah.
so and it leads you to a dogmatic view of overly defining yourself a certain way. And so when you go back and when you reshape how you view things and when you become a little bit more flexible, you realize maybe not all of this stuff is true. Maybe this was just how I saw it, or
It
maybe this was just how I experienced it, but now I don't see it that way. Maybe I don't experience it that way anymore.
right.
And you can let go of the former feelings that it created, and you can just use the past as information rather than having it be emotion. And
Yeah.
so I think that reframing trauma and reframing and reshaping your narrative is an aspect of the systematic process. So not only do you imagine and shape your future, but you also kind of reframe and re-remember your past.
Yeah.
Um, so there's many other elements, obviously, of systematically becoming who you want to be. I think after you would imagine your future based on what you want, you would obviously have to set a goal that would get you there. You'd have to set a measurable thing that your brain can actually see and focus on. In psychology, we have a term called selective attention. Selective attention is basically the idea that your eyes can only, as Dan Sullivan says, your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for.
Mm,
It's really powerful to have a measurable goal,
yeah.
something numeric, something you can see, something you can count, or something you can experience. Because then that allows your brain to start to focus on and see something, which then you can take measurable steps towards going after. So after you've defined a future self, you want to think, what's the single goal or outcome that would make this possible for me? And I'll give an example. When I was in graduate school, I wanted to become a professional writer. That's what I wanted to
Mm,
do.
okay.
And so I was like, that was my future self at the time. I wanted to be someone who was writing books, someone who was making good money, and someone who was just making a living, a good living, providing for my wife and kids as a professional writer. And I wanted to be a published author with one of the big houses. So those were all attributes of the future self version of me that I wanted. And so once I kind of laid out who I wanted to be and what I wanted my circumstances to be, I then had to ask, well, what's the most likely thing that would make that possible? What would be required for me to do that?
Hmm.
And after asking a lot of people in that industry questions, they said, well, you know, you should probably try to get a book deal. You'd need a book contract with one of those things. And in order to be making the kind of money you're talking about, you'd need like a six-figure book contract. Like there's contracts for $10,000, there's contracts for $500,000, there's contracts for $1 million. So if you wanted to make a living doing that, you'd probably need a six-figure book deal. And so I'm like, okay, bing, bing, bing. That's a very definable, measurable thing that I can focus on. And it's like, if I make that true, if I get a six-figure book deal, then I will be my future self.
Right.
And so then you can reverse engineer how to do that. So you have to come up with a measurable target, because your future self is kind of ethereal. I mean, to some degree,
Hmm.
you can define that person, but you need to actually do something to make that person real. And that's where goals come in. And setting a specific measurable goal and finding the goal that would enable you to become that self. Once you've got a target, then you can reverse engineer that target. And by the way, I'll just say two more things and then we can go back and forth. But like, in order to engage in what's called deliberate practice, and deliberate practice is what you're doing right now. it's
Right.
it's engaging in a process that allows you to develop skills and attributes that you're trying to acquire. Like,
Yeah.
deliberate practice is called the process. It's the process of engaging in very meaningful practice that turns into you becoming who you want to be or developing skills.
Right.
You can't actually practice without having a vision of a future self that has the skills you want. So you, as the podcaster, would need, in order for these podcasts to turn into some form of transformation for you, you'd need to see yourself a certain way in the future, whether that's, what kind of podcaster do you want to be, or radio host, so that this experience could lead to that outcome.
Right.
Um, um, so you need a future self vision to engage in the type of process that leads to the type of change you're looking for. You can't engage in deliberate practice without a vision of yourself. You also can't have extreme motivation without it either, because motivation requires a clear and compelling goal. And
Right.
so, anyways, these are just a few thoughts. What are your thoughts on all this?
uh this all, it's that process. And like you're saying, being upset about my past, I've lived a good life up until this point. The goals I've set, the things I've wanted to do, I've been able to achieve. I'm providing a good living for my family, and have raised 7 kids that are all out doing fairly well in the world. And so those things, I feel like, I've done all right. And now it's taking that limiting belief that, no, this is not something you really can do, or this is hard. Um, like you say, I'm saying, no, it's something I want to do. I've got to figure out how to do this. And so, find the coaches, find the mentors, um,
You're now
find,
engaging in the type of process that leads to change. You're
yes,
willing to, if it's hard, that means it's going to change you, right?
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. It
By
really,
nature.
it has to. If it's hard and you're working through it, you have to change to be able to get over, around, or whatever is in the way. You have to change to be the person. And that's what I've learned, is you got to become the person that can do those things. And that's the
Yeah,
change you've got to make in your life.
I love that. Yeah, so
So,
what kind of pulling what you're saying with what I'm saying. The starting point of what I'm saying is the process is identity.
mhm,
You would start with the identity of your future self, because that identity, and obviously you could mix with identity your sense of purpose, gives you not only direction but reason to go through what you're talking about.
Right.
the learning process, which is difficult mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically. Um, Going through that learning process is required. You got to make courageous or just intentional moves forward. And what that ends up leading to is learning experiences, or what I call peak experiences in the book.
Right.
Those experiences solidify the identity that you're striving to create. And so the more you act as your future self, the more you're going to believe it and the more confidence you're going to build, which is going to allow you to see it, believe it, and keep going. And so the experiences themselves, you jumping on the podcast, you getting better at interviewing, you doing what you want to do, and whatever, for any listener here, like whatever your future self is and whatever your goals are, by engaging in it, and reminding yourself of it every single day, you start to more fully want it. You start to
Right.
fully identify with it. You start to more fully believe it. And so by doing it, by acting from the perspective of your future identity rather than your former identity, and going through the learning experiences and having the new emotional experiences, even the failures, you start to really enhance your commitment to this new idea.
Yeah. Well, and I've kind of lived all of that. I started doing a few podcasts and really had a hard time finding people to interview and doing that solo podcast was kind of hard, just coming up with ideas and sitting here and talking for 45 minutes was really hard. And so I got kind of down on myself and the desire kind of waned a little bit. And then I just decided I need to do this. I need to try it. I did a 15-minute podcast, and then I did a 20-minute podcast, and then it grew as um, I saw myself. I said to myself, "You need to do this," and
Yeah, you started
so
to develop
it started.
capability along the way. Because
Yeah,
in the beginning, again, your future self isn't who you are. Your
yeah,
future self's a brilliant podcaster, but maybe you, when we're talking about it, weren't quite there yet,
right,
and so you needed to start, maybe a little smaller with 5 or 10 minute podcasts, because you're not quite your future self yet. You don't have those
right.
skills and those interviewing skills and stuff. So you start small, and you develop the confidence and the capability, to eventually become that person.
Yeah, and it as I did it, it really did bring back that desire to do this. And it just amazed me that, "Now wait a minute, why was I so down on myself? Why was I thinking this was so hard? Because I didn't know how to do it before." And so,
Well, and also you were starting to get confidence with
yeah,
small wins. And
yeah,
so those small wins led to confidence, and you believed it more, and then you wanted it more.
yeah,
That's why you got to keep going even when it's a little scary, because as you get strokes of confidence, then you want the thing even more. And you realize, why have I been procrastinating this thing for so long?
yeah,
Or why have I been avoiding this? This is freaking awesome. This is exactly what I want to be doing. But
exactly.
there's a quote from the Harvard, psychologist Jerome Bruner. He says that you're more likely to act your way into feeling than feeling yourself into action. So that's what
Oh,
you're talking about.
wow, yeah,
You were making actions and you were moving forward, and then the feelings came
yeah,
afterwards. You were feeling it. Yeah, I want to do this more, but it followed the action.
exactly,
It didn't create the action.
yeah. No, that's exactly really the experience I've had over the last 2 years is the more I act on it, the more I put forward that effort, little doors to seem to open here or there, and I find new ways to contact people to do interviews, and as I do more interviews, more little contacts come in. So, yeah, it's that becoming. Now the goal is to become to getting the 500 listeners a month and start building that listenership, and so that's my next step up, so,
So you'd have to ask yourself, what kind of podcasts get 500 listens per month?
yeah, that
What would you need to be and do in order to be someone, a podcast that would attract that type of listenership?
right,
Right. And you'd have to become flexible and adaptable to what you're willing to learn.
right, exactly, and do the research, do the learning to become that person, so,
But if you want it, you'll do it. When the why's
yeah,
strong enough, you'll figure out how.
that's right, that's right. Um, well, let's take a quick break here, and then we'll come back and find out a few more things about this thing we call personality.
Sounds good.
Okay. Welcome back to Rebuilding. We're talking with Dr. Benjamin Hardiy about your personality and why you're the one who can shape your personality and shape who you want to be. So, Ben, let's talk about. We've talked a little bit about goals and why they're so important. Um, why has personality and these personality tests really kind of infected, I would say, that the popular crowd, and why do they think these things are so important?
It's a brilliant question. Personality tests have been popular for quite a while.
Yeah.
Uh, Myers and Briggs has been around, I think, since like 40s or 50s. It's a huge company. That's, by the way, the number one test.
Okay.
But at this point now in pop culture, hundreds of tests are made every single day. Big tests, small tests, like what's your Disney character, like what's your animal, what's your shark,
Yeah.
um, I think the reason they're so popular and the reason people really like them is because people have no clue who they think that they are. People are very unclear on their own identity, their own sense of purpose and direction. And so, what these tests do is they're a quick fix. These tests give someone a score, and that score then becomes a way of identifying themselves. Oh,
Hmm.
I'm a ENTJ, or I'm a blue, or I'm a whatever it is.
Right.
And so these tests give a quick snapshot identity of yourself that feels pretty accurate because you're the one who scored the test. Um, and so we as people really like certainty. We like things to be clear. We like to remove complexity. And so when you can have some sense of definition of self, then it's that people really like that. Um, Obviously there's lots of problems with these tests, one being that they're definitely not scientific. No,
Right.
but no type-based test is scientific because they're not valid and they're not consistent. What the research shows is that with these tests, the longer the gap between when you take the tests, the different scores you'll get. So whatever your score is now, it wasn't the same score you'd get 5 years ago. Let's just say that. And if you've gone
Okay.
through a lot of learning experiences in the last 3 to 5 years, you're probably not going to get the same score at all. Research shows that the longer the gap between two tests, the less correlated those tests will be. Research also shows that the conditions in which you take the test determine the score you get, and so how you see yourself and how you answer various questions um, isn't always the same. Your emotions, your mood, the reason you're taking the test, all of these things influence your score, and then the score influences the report back.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that these tests don't do is they don't take into account context. You get a score and then you assume that that score is who you always are,
Right.
which is not true. In different situations, you're going to be different. In some situations, you're going to be a lot more energetic. In other situations, you're going to be a lot more low key, like some. And so what these tests do though is that they give you a label, and then that label becomes your selective attention. It becomes your filter through which you see the world. It becomes tunnel vision.
Right.
And so basically what Ellen Langer, the Harvard psychologist, has found is that when you overly apply a label to yourself, you become mindless. You assume that the label is
Mm.
always true, and that's actually not accurate. Like when people define themselves as depressed, they think that they're always depressed, and they ignore the many instances when that's just not true.
Right.
And so they're mindless of any time that the label isn't true. And that's, I think, what these personality tests do is that you get a label and then you assume it's always true, which isn't true. You then come to defend the label, and you use that label to determine your goals in life. And so it becomes incredibly limiting. It becomes a fixed mindset about who you are, and you assume that the label is the real and true and authentic you, which it's not.
So
And it limits your imagination. So I
right.
mean, these tests are not only are they non-scientific and bogus, to be fully honest with you, but they create a really limiting view of yourself and a very limiting view of the world for you, which leads you to being mindless and lacking creativity.
So you're saying there, and what I heard is there a way for you to confirm that your status quo, your comfort zone is okay, that you're okay where you are and you don't really have to change.
I think that that's how people often interpret them is that this is just who I am. Like I finally have a way of describing and defining myself. And so now I'm finally free to be who I actually am. And so once you've made that all important discovery of your personality, then you can build your whole life around that personality. And you can set goals that are easy or that come natural, and you can get in relationships with people that perfectly fit you.
Mm,
And it leads you to being very rigid and very non-flexible in what you're willing to pursue and what you're willing to put yourself through. And we do see that in pop culture today.
right.
We see kids that are incredibly less willing to try difficult things like giving class presentations because it's scary.
Yeah.
um, we see people who don't want to do things because they're hard.
Yeah.
And we see millennials pushing off getting real jobs for longer and longer and longer, and staying in their parents' basement for longer and longer and longer, and not being willing to put themselves through hard and transformational experiences. And so, yeah, we do live in a culture that really prizes defining yourself and limiting yourself and having excuses to justify why you won't do what isn't isn't easy or that would require change.
Right. Um, so how say you've taken one of these tests and you feel like you're in your comfort zone and then something comes and bumps you out. Something happens in your life, a trauma or an experience or some major change. How do you then work on altering those feelings, those thoughts of this is my comfort zone into an effective way to redesign who you are? How,
Yeah, things. So the definition of psychological flexibility is holding your thoughts and emotions loosely
mhm,
while pursuing a meaningful goal or living out meaningful values.
okay.
And so take your current perspectives a little more loosely, even about yourself.
Mhm.
You don't see the world as it is. Stephen R. Covey said, "You don't see the world as it is; you see the world as you are."
Oh,
And so
yeah.
you don't have an accurate view of the world. That same statement is true of your past, by the way. You don't see the past as it is; you see the past as you are.
Right.
And so you just have to realize that your current view of yourself and even your current identity is limited. Um, and it's not the accurate reality. I mean, it is your reality, but it can and does change, and you can
Right.
change your filter, you can change your perspectives, you can have new experiences, you can even change your identity and how you see yourself. um, and so I would just start by letting go to some degree of holding so tightly to who you think you are. I'm not saying you shouldn't have an identity, because having an identity is very incredibly important.
Right. Right.
But that identity hopefully is refining over time, and becoming more clear based on what you truly want, and based on who you definitely really want to be, regardless of what's required. And also just knowing you're going to go through experiences and gain new insights and information that are going to change what you want, and change what you desire, and give you a deeper sense of purpose. I'll just give a quick example myself. Like when my wife and I became foster parents of 3 kids when I was going through school,
Mhm.
that experience changed a lot of my perspectives. It changed a lot of how I view myself, a lot of what I value, a lot of, it caused me to question a lot of my current goals,
Right.
and made me realize maybe the things that I've been valuing, or maybe the things that I've been pursuing, are not really worth pursuing anymore, because I now see the world differently, and I now value things differently.
Mhm.
And so questioning your current goals, questioning your current desires, questioning why you view yourself a certain way, and then asking yourself, what would I truly want if I could have it? A lot of people don't even ask that question because they don't have the confidence to believe it's even worth trying.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like, what would I have if I could have it? What would I want if I could be it? Um, yes, that person is different than you are now. That's always true with any goal. Um,
Right.
but I love the quote from Robert Brault, that we are kept from our goal not by obstacles, but by a clear path to lesser goals. And so I
Mm.
think that sometimes it takes honesty and saying, you know what, I've been pursuing lesser goals because there's a clear, easier path to those lesser goals.
Right.
But what would I really want if I was willing to go for it and fail and try? And
Right.
then that becomes your future self. And then that becomes the basis through which you start to define yourself. And that becomes the story through which you start telling people and explaining who you are. And no, this is what I really want. That's a lot more authentic and a lot more honest than pursuing lesser goals. It's a lot more honest to say, this is what I really want. I have no clue how I'm going to get there. I'm going to have to go through a lot of change. And I don't even know if I am going to get there, but I'm going to go for it because that's what
Right.
I really want.
Yeah.
So I think starting to own and pull out what you really want and starting to tell people about it and being more courageous and starting to pursue it and not letting your social environment, your group, or your former traumas stop you from pursuing it. And then committing to it and doing whatever it takes to become that type of person who can eventually have it.
Yeah. That's the
More
big part to
meaningful
me.
life.
The commitment to I want to do this and I'm committing to it, and so that really kind of sets your mind that way, I think. So,
Definitely. You have to commit.
yeah.
It takes commitment to, start being more and more courageous. And so
Yeah.
you've got to commit to the idea. And that commitment requires various things. You can do things to increase your commitment, such as beginning to invest money in that
Mhm.
goal and in your future identity. One of the things I did when I first wanted to be a successful writer is I invested couple $100 here and there. I bought an online course and I taught myself how to write viral articles. I spent like $800 on a domain name. That was freaking scary
Yeah.
as a graduate student. Like you bought a microphone,
Yeah.
like you started investing money in this idea and in this identity. And as you do that, you're watching yourself begin to live out this future self.
Yeah.
And then you got to keep taking actions forward. So investing money is a good way to create commitment. It gives you a sense of ownership and a sense of being invested. And you don't want to go back on that investment.
Right.
Telling other people that you're going to do this creates social pressure. I mean, all these things are forcing functions. But any and all actions you can take forward signal back to you that this is who you actually are now. And you can eventually create a point of no return experience where uh, you just realize that this is who I am and I can't go back to who I was before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we kind of get to the end of the show here, what would your kind of that last little bit of advice you would give to listeners to the show of first, read the book, but then um,
This is the book.
the
Personality isn't permanent. Um,
personality isn't permanent. It was a great read. I kind of skimmed some of it, but I read a lot of it. What kind of advice would you give to people after they've read the book to make that transformation or
if
to
you read the book, you will know what to do. Let's just say that there is so much in this book
there
that
is.
will blow your mind. It will help you redefine and reshape your past, which is huge.
Yeah.
It'll help you take ownership of your own narrative. It'll help you reshape trauma. It'll help you to um, go through experiences that reshape your subconscious mind, which is very much a powerful aspect of how you show up. Your subconscious makes up 95% of who you are and what you do.
Right.
So much of our life is lived on autopilot, which is basically
Yeah.
on subconsciously. And so it'll
Yeah.
help you to reshape what your autopilot is so that your autopilot's your future self, not your former self. And it will help you reshape your environment because your environment and the people around you so much influence who you are and how you show up. And
Absolutely.
so this book will give you the tools you need to clarify what you want and then to systematically go out and get it, starting with your identity and then everything else you need to be the person you want to be. So this book will challenge the heck out of you and it will excite you and it will give you the roadmap you need. So this is really what you need. You read this, you'll know what to do next.
Okay. So yes, go out, get personality isn't permanent. Read it, make it a part of your life. Figure out where you want to be in 5, 10 years, and then make the commitment to be there. Um, so thanks, Ben, again for your time and all of your thoughts and you've even helped me today. Didn't expect that. So we
Maybe you should expect that more
I
often, my
should
man.
I
You got to
should
have peak experiences every day. The reason why I think you had a peak experience is because you're out doing it. You're
yeah.
living intentionally. You're doing podcasts. This is what you want to be doing. And when you're doing what you want to be doing, you have a lot of learning experiences.
Yeah. So yeah, I tend to learn more from my guests than I ever thought I would. So um, I will in the show notes put your contact information, a link to where they can get the book, and again, I really appreciate your being here, and I think it'll be a benefit to the people that are listening. And um, thanks again.
You're welcome. Very happy to be on your show. It was
Uh-huh.
great.
All right.
As always, thank you for listening to Rebuilding. I hope that you have heard something today that will help you on your path to rebuilding your life. If something resonated, if you felt a call to action, please take that action and rebuild. Let me know what you think of today's show or any of my shows. You can leave comments at rebuilding.podbean.com or email at j@jwalter.com. I would love to hear from you. Comments, suggestions, and topics that you would like me to cover are always welcome. Remember, a dream written down with a deadline is a goal, and a goal achieved is a dream come true. Until next time, I am Jay Walter, and I am always rebuilding.